And he's based loosely on someone you actually worked with?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another labor of love in writing this. I worked with a guy named Kenny McCabe, who was 6'5", 250 pounds of Brooklyn, and thick accent, booming voice, and a great investigator, the best I've ever seen. And I became very close with him as a line prosecutor, and then when I became the U.S. attorney. And he died in 2006, way too young. And I have tried to capture him there. And I've actually used the banter he would have with me. He called me Mr. Smooth. And so I called him Mr. Rough. And then he would say, you know, I'm not as good a pussin' as you think I am. And I would say, what makes you think that I think you're a good person? And so we would have this banter. And this true story, a week ago, I was in the basement organizing stuff in my house in Virginia, and I saw, when I left as a line prosecutor, they gave me one of these ridiculous caricature sketches, and they had everybody who'd worked on the case sign on the mat. And on the mat, I can see he's written, Mr. Smooth, the good guys will miss you, and so will I. and then he signed it. And I've tried to capture this sense that he had this feeling like he lives in more of a borderland, that he has to work so closely with these guys in Cosa Nostra that he's gotten some of it on him. And so I'm over here, he's in the middle in a way, and he would sort of be protective of me in that way. I don't think he was fair to himself, but I've tried to capture that spirit. And I wrote in the acknowledgments that I hope his family can feel him in these pages, even though this is fiction.
Well, I mean, the story you just told is reflected here. And I mean, you did capture that, the give and take between the prosecutor and he.
And he was also, which I've also tried to capture, this big bear of a man was colorblind. And so all of us who were friends with him, every time he testified, we would ask some unplanned question that called for him to identify something by color. And so I can remember in court, the true story, in courtroom 318, same courtroom my little girl grew up to prosecute in, he was on the stand for me, and I said, Mr. McCabe, oh, by the way, Mr. McCabe, what color was that vehicle? And he looks at me like he's just going to kill
me. He knows,
me.
yeah.
And he looks at me and says, I don't know. I'm colorblind. And so he comes off the stand, and he walks behind me, and I'll give you the exact quote. He says, bunch of fucking comedians. And it slides behind me into his chair. To be able to relive that and to picture my beloved friend is a joy. And I hope readers will feel him in the same way.
We're going to go to some questions, but is this your future now, writing?
Yeah, this is what I want to do when I grow up.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's a great start. It's a great start. All right, this is questions from our audience. Why did you decide to start writing fiction? Do you enjoy it more than nonfiction?
First I said I wasn't going to do it. My second book was a collection of stories from cases I had done, different stories than this, but stories to try and illustrate the principles that should undergird the Department of Justice. Because at that point, Bill Barr was the Attorney General, and Donald Trump was the President, and I was really worried that especially young people would lose sight of how it's supposed to be. And so I told stories, and the editor said, he would say, this scene and that scene, and I would say, dude, that's not a scene, that's my life, right? That happened. And he would say, yeah, but you write narrative well, you write dialogue really well, it's really interesting, you should write fiction. I said no. And then he pitched the idea of me doing it with somebody, an established writer, and I said, no, I'd love to write my whole life. I love to write. If I did it, I would do it myself, but no. But what happened to me is the farther I got from the government, the easier it became to think about this. I always had a hard time watching TV shows about the work and reading about it. Anything about terrorism, espionage, or crime. But the farther I got from that world, the easier it became to think about it. So I decided to give it a shot, and my wife pitched this story, and I started writing it and found it addictive. Harder than nonfiction, but more fun. Yeah. Harder because nonfiction is just about something happened. You got to get it right. Yeah. And so I'm checking transcripts and memos, and then write it in an interesting way, but imagination is forbidden, and fiction is the reverse. It didn't happen. And so you have to imagine it and keep it straight. And that's where I got real help, especially from my spouse, because she would say, you know, Benny's voice is drifting. And of course I would say, no, it's not. And then I would realize she was right and fix it.
Second question is actually a pretty good follow-up. Did working with Trump cause you to gain a greater respect for fiction? Somebody asked.
That's what I love about Philadelphia. Funny people. I'll tell you though, so maybe in a sense, working with Trump caused me to obsess on the danger to our country if we stop measuring our leaders by their tether to the truth. And my worry during the Trump era, which we're still living in, but especially when he was president, was that we'll be so overwhelmed. Right? There has to be a touchstone, and all leaders make false statements, and we grade them by what do they mean, right? I remember President Obama said, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, and that turned out not to be true. And so what did all of us do? We'd say, well, what did he mean? And what was he thinking when he said that? And he said, well, I didn't mean, I thought. And so we forced him to explain himself. My worry was that the wave of lies would be so great that it would wash away that touchstone, and we would just stop trying to measure our leaders by that. And so my obsession became making sure that I said the truth is a real thing, it exists, and we have to measure our leaders by their tether to it. And so, yeah, in a way, that the avalanche of fiction had an effect on me in a big way.
This is a question about your writing process. What's the best way you've found to organize your plot direction?
I'll tell you how I do it, and I don't know whether this is the best way, but working with my wife, who, as I said, has great story vision, we agree on an entire story. So the arc of the whole story. Here's how it starts, here's how it ends, and then who the characters will be. And we debate that, and then so what I do is once we've had these conversations, I then go away and write a summary of the story and a bio of each of the characters. And then she looks on it on a Google Doc and gives me loving and painful feedback, and then I iterate, and then we get to a place where I get no more feedback, and I said, okay, that's it. And then the trick that she's taught me is, once I have the whole story, the next question is, what parts will be behind that curtain and what won't? And when will we show? And I've not read a lot of fiction for reasons that I said, but she's read everything, and she has lots of pet peeves on these things, and one of them is when she feels tricked. Like, you didn't give me a chance to figure this out. You hid stuff, you walked something on at the end, it fell from the sky. And so she's taught me, my obsession has to be, what will peek out under that curtain and when, so that when you get to the end and see how it ends, I have fooled you, but in a fair way, where you're like, nope, he gave me a chance, I missed it. And so it helps me to have the whole story and then try to figure out what to show. I know a lot of great writers, and I'm not a great novel writer, but a lot of great writers say that they start at the beginning not knowing where they're going to go, and then write and get to the destination. And at least so far, I haven't been able to do that. I've written this one, which I really enjoyed, written a second one, which is now out getting loving feedback from my family members, and done it both the same way, starting with a conception of the whole thing, and then figuring out what to show. And then, of course, the trick for me that my wife can't help with is I have to figure out where to put the scenes and how the scenes should sound, what the dialogue should be like, because she doesn't know those places and those people the way that I do, but she helps me with that skeleton.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and check out more of our content. Feel free to give your feedback and suggestions on what we should do next in the comments. This is Infinite Lee Productions. We love ya.